To explore some abandoned places has often been the much thrill to many people. And I understand it myself since I have been exploring some old abandoned places myself since I was 18. So when this story happened, I was about 20 years old. And I wasn't alone in this exploring some old abandoned places. Actually, we were in a group. Me, my girlfriend Erica, same age, my best friend Jasper, and Linda, who is also Jasper's girlfriend. The four of us had always been, well, interested to explore some abandoned places around in our town and even our neighboring towns. Before we do any actual exploring of abandoned places, we always do research about the place, like what it was for, how long it was operational, and why it was even abandoned. But there are also certain things that we always also look into. Well, that depends on what kind of place they are. Like, we have so far explored some old abandoned factories, even some old school buildings, a few old churches, and even a few old abandoned hospitals. But we always make sure that we are prepared for any danger. Even though we also looking into the places that we want to explore, if they are on private property or if it is completely abandoned by even the state. Because we don't want to trespass on any federal land or even private property. But we did actually did some happens that we did go to some private properties, but we did call the owner asking if it was permitted for us to just do some exploring on their property, all this old structure. Most of the time we did get permission, but if we happen to be declined or being refused, we don't pressure on the matter anymore. So we just continue to look on other places we want to explore. You may think that we had never been in any certain grave danger. Well, for the most part, no, because we usually are only explored some places that hasn't even much danger. But we always been prepared for any certain danger, like um, especially if there are buildings that's supposed built in the late 1800s and early 1900s for certain um, elements, like they were being used asbestos, which can cause breathing problems. So we usually are looking into much protection for that. But this story has nothing to do with any such things that. Anyways, there is at least one place that we always wanted to go, but for some reason we never went there until we were decided it was about time. We decided to explore an abandoned farm outside our own town. And it had been abandoned since the 1990s. This actually was quite famous in our town. Well, that it depends on who you ask, because different people had their own version of the story to why this farm was abandoned, who owned it, and why it has never been bought by anyone else, and yeah, that depends on who you even ask. The older generations, they probably just don't want to nothing but do about it, but if you ask sort of our generations, there are many different theories and different versions of the story. But the main part of the story is that, like I said, this farm was abandoned in the 1990s. And I was really curious more about it. Since I have an older brother who now lives out of the city, well, a different state, he had actually been there. I did ask him once what he found, but he said, uh, Not much, just a lot of trash, beer cans, and some graffiti, but that's it. Like, no signs of anything that had happened there. So, one day, like I said, when we were just 20 years old, I told my best friend Jasper that we probably should go to this old abandoned farm that we had talked about, but always put aside. And he totally agreed with me on that. But before we could, like I said earlier, we always look into property owners. So, and since I'm not much the leader type ER group. I'm more like the researcher. So I did dig around in the local library and even ask around, but from what I can understand, at least what I could find, no one even owned the land. It hasn't even been owned since the 1990s. But I did come across one article about the place. And on the day when we went to this place, at least outside of that, we drove in my car. We could still see the farm in a distance. And it was still early in the afternoon, like 2 p.m., and it was in the summer. So there was still many of hours left of daylight. So, and I told the others, like, before we go in there, I did some more research about this place. As you all know, there are so many different versions of the story and theories and urban legend about this place. And all that we all know that it was abandoned in 1990s, which they all agreed. They had heard about it. I told them. It turns out the farm was abandoned in the 1990s when the previous owner, well, he did something that many people was not surprised of. Turned out that not only he was a farmer, but he was growing something that most people probably would even be aware of. Marijuana. He was having a secret patch of marijuana or weed growing on his land, which he grew and sold. And this was he's been doing that since the 1980s and all the way to 1990s for almost about a part of a decade. And suddenly, it was all gone. I searched more into this, like I said, told my friends and my girlfriend Erica. Turned out there were another local group of people who was growing frustrated about this place, about this particular farmer, because he was growing and selling weed on their territory. So it turned out it was just a simple, well, dealings or something like that was going wrong. So based on what I could found, the other group of people who was dissatisfied about this farmer being on their territory selling weed for a much better price and even apparently for something like that, they burned, or at least they stole his weed and burned the rest of his normal crops like corn and all. And that made him angry. But they didn't hesitate to say, based on some rumors, but also what's kind of bit confirmed, they scared him so much. So in overnight, the farmer just left. And ever since then, the farm had been unused and slowly started to fall in disrepair. Even though the farm had been on the market many times, but no one did want to buy it. Jasper thought maybe it was because that the other gang or the group of people who was having much this disagreement with the farmer, that they were one who made sure that no one bought the place. They were afraid maybe that someone else were growing some other things like weed or maybe something else. Even though that was not much as just a theory, but at least what we thought about it. After that, we just walked up to the farm, We looked around, and the barn was, well, it was much left of it. The whole roof of the barn had completely collapsed in. So we didn't even go in there. We only stood by the front, by the door, and just looked in. And we didn't even want to go in because the state that the barn was in, we didn't want to risk it. So we went to the main building, since it was just the barn and the main house on the property. So we looked in, and as my older brother had told me, there were a lot of graffitis, beer cans. Some beer cans had been there for years since based on the rust on them, but there were some that was pretty new. So I would have been surprised that this place was still used as a hangout for teenagers or maybe drifters or something. Even though this house had an upstairs floor, but we didn't go up there based on the house condition. Even though the from outside the house looked to be more better condition compared to the barn, but we didn't want to risk it. So we looked around, but it wasn't even much like maybe a 15 minutes in on our visit to the barn, this house, when we suddenly heard some cracks upstairs, like if someone was walking up there. We didn't hear anything like it before then. So, but then we heard someone yelling, "Whoever is in my house, leave right now, or I will shoot you to death." We were, well, pretty shaken, but we didn't want to risk it, so we bolted. We did hear someone walking down the old staircase, but stopped midway, and once again told us just to go. And if we did go, he would even hurt us. So we didn't know for a fact if he would keep his word, but we bolted all the way to my car, and well, I sped away. But I was told from Erica and Linda, who watched backwards from the back window, they swore they saw an older man, probably like in his 40s, with long beard, standing by the front door before walking in. We dared never go back there, and even told we never spoke about it to anyone else. Mostly because we were probably being told that we shouldn't even be there. And I heard later that the house was eventually demolished by the town because about how it looked like. And also, my dad did tell me that another reason why this farm was demolished, it was just as it was getting bad conditions and also attracted a lot of drunk people, homeless people in the area. So, and since it was also bad for the condition, so it wasn't really worth to keep it there. But now it's just all open fields, well, mostly corn actually. But this was how I and my friends encountered this type of story in this old abandoned farm. Thank you for listening.